It's a combination of our mindsets, our consciousness being renewed so that we fully embrace immortality as a complete way of thinking, and our physical body coming into a state of health, which means realizing that health's our inheritance as children of God, and that then our body aligns with what we think. And I think those two things work together.
Becoming more immortal or whatever.
I don't think you can become more immortal. You're either immortal or you aren't. More of an understanding of immortality, perhaps that's what you're trying to say.
Yes, and the fact is that there's no point living that way unless you have good health, right? So there's stages to it, like actually becoming, well, and renewing the dew of your youth.
Yes, I mean, you wouldn't want to be immortal and miserable either, would you? So in a sense, there's got to be a degree of life that's worth living and joyful and has purpose and meaning for anyone not to think about the immortality. And I think ultimately it's way more than just not dying or the length of time or any of that. There's an abundance about it and the fullness of life about it, which Jesus said, I've come to give you abundant life. And that wasn't just you don't need to die, which of course Jesus also said in John 6, where it's recorded, where he said, if you eat my flesh, drink my blood, you won't die. And he did mean physical death. I mean, most Christians would accept immortality from eternal life perspective of, well, when you die, you go to heaven, your soul doesn't die, your just body does. But actually, Jesus really equated it to the physical. So therefore, yes, there needs to be an understanding that our physical body needs to be as immortal as our spirit and soul. Therefore, any association with death within our physical body needs to be broken, and we need to be set free from any associating with physical death. And of course, why do people die? Well, because their body packs up basically in some way or another, so yes, you wouldn't want to not die but be sick, and it doesn't really equate. Immortality must mean health, full health to our whole body, spirit, soul, body, and all of our cells of our body will be continually renewing themselves and not dying, unless they need repairing or replacing. We do replace most of our cells of our body every so many weeks, anyway. But when you sort of age, the body's ability and the cells of the body's ability to communicate with each other fails, and therefore the body fails to renew or restore or repair the cells, and they eventually die. Well, essentially, if we're going to live in health, we need to be restored back to God's original intention, and therefore the association with death, which was connected to independence, has to change. We can't be immortal and be independent, and we have to be in union and oneness with life. God is life. God is spirit. God is love. God is life. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. All of those sort of concepts need to be seen in the correct understanding of them, which an abundance of life is that we live in fullness of health, and we live in fullness of purpose, and we also live in a way which is in union and oneness with life itself. So we have the river of life flowing in us. Jesus said in John 4, where we have rivers, we have the fountain of life if we drink from the source that he is. So we need to have the right source of life. It isn't that we will suddenly develop an ability or create technology that will keep us alive forever. We need life in abundance, which is the source, which is being in union and oneness with Jesus. And therefore, having that relationship will lead to abundance. And when Jesus said, eat my flesh and drink my blood, obviously he wasn't talking literally. He was talking of the sort of figurative relationship that we would have in being in oneness with him and in union with him, that we have access to life itself. And the river of life flowing from the throne of God through the tree of life carries with it energy, which essentially is just abundance of all that we need in every way, and that flows in us. So we have a fountain within us which flows rivers of living water, which is life, energy, spirit. So we need to be able to obviously be in agreement with that. So our mindset needs to be severed from all concepts of death, all concepts of promotion. So when we die, we get promoted to a better realm. All of those sort of religious concepts, we need to be renewed from that and have a true mindset, which is an immortal mindset, which is really focused on that's who we are. My state of being is immortality because that's who God created me. He never created me to die. Death was a consequence of walking away from life. Man stopped receiving the source of life and therefore was dependent on his own source. And that source obviously failed because independence, the consequence of independence was death. Now Jesus came and was resurrected and gave us back immortal life, and gave us that back in that he breathed the spirit in us. So we received the spirit, which was life, energy, the person of the spirit, you could say, but it was more than just the person. It was all the attributes of who Jesus was in sense of abundance of life. So yeah, I would say our mindset needs to change so that we have an understanding of what immortality is. In 2 Timothy 1:9-10, it says, that Jesus has brought life and immortality to light in the gospel, or through the gospel. So through the good news, which is Jesus, then he has brought the truth of what our life should be in a state of immortality to light, into revelation, so that we can embrace it, receive it, experience it, and live from that state of being. But most people still have a lot of associations with death in their thinking. Those need to be changed. Our minds needs to be renewed. So there's no doubt or unbelief. You're never going to be immortal if you have doubt and unbelief. If you're double-minded over immortality. And for some people, they don't want it because their life is so miserable and so unfulfilled, they don't want to live forever. Why would you in that state? Which is why the tree of life was the path to the tree of life. You had to go through the fiery sword. In other words, you had to go for a refining process to engage the tree of life, which meant you had to leave independence effectively. So they followed their own independence and didn't enter into eternal life. So access to heaven was closed because if they accessed the tree of life in a fallen state, then they could live forever in being miserable and not knowing who they were and lost identity and all of that. So God wants us to live forever in the knowledge, and not forever being a term which just means not without end. And I think that life may take on different perspectives in ages to come, but we live and then don't physically die. But that doesn't mean that we're not moved from one realm to another. If I had finished my destiny, which may be related to my being on the earth, then I wouldn't want to stay around with nothing to do. So I would want to be translated to another realm to continue my destiny there. So it doesn't mean that we stay the same. You know, immortality is not necessarily conformity. You know, it may well mean transformation, transfiguration going forward. And I do believe immortality really is a transfiguration process in which the whole of our being is transfigured, metamorphosed from the state that we were in, and some of us still are in, to being in a different state. You know, and that might be a state of consciousness first, and then a state where our whole life aligns with what we believe. You know, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. So what we think determines who we are. In the sense, is my thinking aligned to God's thinking about me? Do I understand the vast sum of his thoughts? Do I know them? Have I experienced the reality of that? And I think that's the process of having our mind renewed, being transfigured, and having our whole being brought back into the glory of our identity as a son of God within our spirit. Man was originally clothed with glory, and that glory is his glorious identity as a son. So we need that glorious identity restored so we know who we are, and then we live out of the knowledge of who we are, which is an immortal being, and a being which is clothed in glorious light of identity. Therefore, we are not subject to anything of darkness. So, yeah, I think that's a process of coming into it. But obviously, you don't want to be, you know, continuing to have your body failing and aging to a point where you could die in the process. So you've got to embrace, in a sense, you know, oh, well, by the time I get there, you know, I'm 109 years old or something, and I'm wrinkly and blah, blah, and got no energy. Well, I wouldn't want to live like that. So I need to take on the board that my whole being can be fully energized, fully active, fully abundantly operating, and also have the capacity of that, you know, which means having the abilities of what immortal life is, which is a restoration of the fullness of our capacity, which means our mind fully working, functioning, our body fully working, functioning, everything as we were designed to be fully functioning and working, you know, which isn't the case for most people right now. Now, the problem for most people is they don't have any examples. You know, in one sense, everyone right this second who's alive could, yeah, technically be immortal because them dead, them died. Yeah, so no one knows until someone dies whether they're immortal or not, do they? If they die, they're not. If they continue to live, they are. Now, there are obviously some Bible examples of people who didn't die, like Enoch and Elijah, who were translated into another realm and were able to function there, didn't die physically here. And there are those that talk about the desert fathers, who are those who have, I guess, embraced immortality and remain alive after hundreds of years. And there are some examples of people who've met people like that and wrote some books about them. One, I think, by Sundar Singh, who wrote a book about the Maharishi of Kailash, which is a mountain in somewhere in Nepal or somewhere, Himalayas somewhere, in which he met a guy who had been alive for hundreds of years and was living, focusing his life on interceding for people, I guess, or mankind. And there are those who talked about desert fathers who have a sort of translucent appearance. And some would say the Apostle John never died. I've heard that mentioned, that, you know, they tried to kill him and couldn't, and he never actually died and still alive, but has the ability to function in multiple realms. So, you know, lots of questions about it, which I'm sure, you know, we need to find answers to and come into fullness of understanding of it. But I do believe it's way, way more than just not physically dying. Yeah. Yeah. Some would say, well, how? You know, you know, and I would say probably it's a combination of our mindsets, our consciousness being renewed so that we fully embrace immortality as a complete way of thinking, and our physical body coming into a state of health, which means realizing that health's our inheritance as children of God, and that then our body aligns with what we think. And I think those two things work together. And for me, I've lived in health for 30 years or so, having embraced health before I really understood anything about immortality. So, health for me was not having sickness, but I still fully anticipated dying one day when my time was up, whatever. And that was the concept I had. So I had a concept of time would run out one day and I wouldn't have any left. Therefore, I wouldn't be here anymore because I would die. But I now realize that was a wrong understanding. So I received the right understanding about health, that I could live in fullness and abundance of health. Then the next sort of step to having that was, okay, well, if there's no sickness and there is health, then you also need to embrace the fact that Jesus said you won't die. And then that took on a whole different perspective. And when I started taking communion as a ongoing event, or originally, focus with intention, then I was receiving life and receiving abundant life. And then that reception of that was applied to everything in my whole being that needed a transfiguration. So I needed to be transfigured, and that meant my DNA needed to be completely restored, receiving not only the light, of the third strand of my DNA, but also the two strands which came from my parents, if you like, also having no association with what has gone on in my family history, whether that be genetic or epigenetic factors, which would also affect perhaps my whole life. But also you have to take on responsibility in that as well to live in a healthy way. You can't abuse your body and then expect it not to give up, so you've got to treat it well. Now, that doesn't mean, in a sense, being in bondage to anything, like, oh, I can't eat this, I can't eat that. I eat everything I like, but I eat everything I like in a healthy, balanced way. So if I like some chocolate, then I would eat some chocolate, but I wouldn't eat 10 pounds of chocolate a day, or 10 chocolate bars a day. I might have a piece of chocolate once a week when I fancy some, particularly Christmas and Easter, because you get given chocolate at Christmas and Easter. But I don't tend to eat chocolate all the time. And I treat my body with respect, and I cooperate with my body, work together in cooperation and oneness with my whole being. So although I've not had sickness or disease, I have had some accidents, injuries over the last 30 years, in which I had to learn how to speed up the healing process that my body was created to have. And I've learned to cooperate in that healing process of being more careful to make sure that injuries and accidents didn't happen, because, I'm not a person who has any fear, which sometimes lack of fear can also mean lack of respect. So you've got to be respectful of things which could be dangerous. Now, for me, in my hobbies and things I enjoy doing, that's power tools. And, I have over the years had some accidents with power tools, which have caused damage to me particularly my fingers, and a number of times. And the first time it happened was with a chop saw, which, you know, chopped a big hole in my thumb, which has got a big scar on it. And at that point, you know, I was living in health, but I didn't really know how to accelerate that in any way. I just basically wrapped it up and, you know, carried on working, didn't really think too much about it. Once I'd sort of recovered from the shock of looking down and seeing all the blood, and it was a little bit like, oh, you know, wrapped it up, carried on, and got on with it. The next time I did it was with a table saw. I was in a different place. And then in that place, I was able to work with my body for its repair in an accelerated way. And I chose actually to sort of monitor the process. And, you know, I had a big, my fingernail was ripped off and I had a big chunk taken out by this table saw. But I, you know, and I chose not to have an infection, and I didn't get stitches or anything like that. I just, you know, particularly, I think with my daughter, I basically showed her, which she didn't like, and then sort of showed her and sort of monitored the process, which actually, you know, my nail completely regrew, which it doesn't normally do when it gets ripped out from the roots, you know, and sliced up, and, you know, a bit gory. But in reality, you know, it was quite quick, you know, and now I treat the chop saw and the table saw with a lot more respect, because they're very dangerous pieces of equipment if I'm not careful. So I'm more careful because I want to look after my body, and I don't want to lose fingers or pieces of finger. Now, each piece of equipment needs to be treated with respect. And, you know, and the last time I hurt myself was on a planer, thickener, so planer thing, jointer, which essentially was a spinning blade which goes around 20,000 revs a minute. And my hand slipped off a piece of wood, and two fingers at the top got caught on it, and they took two massive chunks out of my fingers, you know, and literally, you know, it was big chunks right down to the bone, you know. So it was like, okay, what am I going to do with that? Well, I sort of cooperate with God and myself to think, okay, what do I do? My daughter was like, you need to go to hospital. And I thought, no, I'm not going to choose to go to hospital. Can you just wrap it up? I'm not going to get infection. So that was my choice. And it didn't hurt because basically it hit it so hard, it damaged all the nerves. So at that moment, I couldn't feel anything. It was numb. It was like totally numb. Within about 4 hours, it was in agony. But then I had to manage the pain. So I then chose to manage the pain. Now I was sensible. Like I didn't go around hitting it with stuff, because if I did, it would really hurt, because all the nerve endings were exposed, you know. And I again chose for accelerated healing. I took the bandages off within a day, opened it up to the air, and essentially it just restored. Now I don't even have scars. Literally the whole, it grew out, you know, and totally restored itself. I don't have any scars. I have no nerve damage, nerve ending, but I worked with my body on that. I had to agree, focus my intention, choose the intention that this would be completely restored and made whole. And actually it only took about, I think, 10 days for it to be completely restored, which was, you know, not possible in a normal sense. But nothing's impossible when you choose to do it. Now, it could have been a miracle, like instant, okay, but that wasn't the process I needed to learn. I need to make sure I cooperate with my body and learn. I learned to manage pain. So I learned to make sure that pain was not, because pain can be a good thing in that it warns you, this is sore, don't hit it. You know, so I made sure I was very careful, you know, but, you know, I was in the workshop again within a day, and, you know, but I was just more careful. And now on that piece of equipment, I am much more careful. I make sure the guard is down, that I'm wise in how I use things. So all of the whole process really means working together, being sensible. You know, I get plenty of sleep, the amount that I need, which is not that much. So, you know, I get six hours sleep or so a day, so I can, go to midnight, go to bed, and wake up at 6 and have a perfectly healthy lifestyle. For me, I eat well and I take exercise. In the winter, I go in the gym on the treadmill. In the summer, I go out for a walk every day, and enjoy the fresh air and get exercise. So I'm sensible with it. A healthy lifestyle is an important area. You can't abuse your body, then just say, well, I'm going to be immortal. It doesn't work that way. Everything's got to be together in a completely holistic, healthy, and one state of being. Physically, spiritually, emotionally, everything's got to be in that state of being. So if I was to live in unforgiveness, that will be toxic to my body, and I would not be able to maintain a state of immortality if I was to live in resentment and bitterness and unforgiveness. So there are also emotional things that we need to put into place to make sure we live in a state of rest. That's not striving. That is not being anxious. That's not being worried. All of those things, all of those emotions will have a toxic effect on the body if we don't manage them correctly. So there are things we have to really put into place when it comes to thinking about life and immortality, which are not just, oh, great, I'm immortal, and don't think about it ever again. Well, that won't work. It has to be intentional, and you have to live an immortal life and the lifestyle of immortality in that way. So for me, I've got more energy than I had, any time in my whole life, because now I know to manage energy. I know how to generate energy within. I know how to live from an energized state. I know how to manage life that way. I will always have all that I need to do everything that I need to do. So, I can work physically really hard for a day outside, in the garden, or chopping down trees, or doing all sorts of stuff. I've got myself a lathe, so I'm now chopping down a whole load of tree trunks and branches and getting a whole load of wood for the winter, when I'm going to learn how to do wood turning, because that's my next plan of something to keep myself occupied and active. I'm going to learn how to do wood turning, and so I need wood. So right now, I'm chopping down bits of logs and cutting them up and doing things like that. So I can do that all day and whatever and not get tired, because I've chosen to intentionally do that. Therefore, I've chosen to generate enough energy to do it. Now, there's a physical sense where your body, when you're not used to necessarily doing lots and lots of manual labor, your muscles get, in a sense, stretched, and they get bigger if you keep doing physical energy, because they stretch and you tear the muscle fibers and you restore them in a bigger state. So I'm aware of all that. Coming from a medical science background, I'm aware of how the body works. So although I might not run out of energy, I don't expect not to have muscle fatigue, in that then my muscles will grow if I keep doing things like that. But I'm aware of that, so I can manage it. But it's all intentional. Everything's an intentional way of living. It's not just haphazard and hope for the best. Immortality is not wishful thinking. It's got to be a lifestyle choice, an intentional choice to live in that way, which a lot of people aren't disciplined enough to do. They just don't treat life seriously enough. Now, I have lots of fun and I have plenty of opportunity to enjoy life in every way, but I'm also respectful of my body and my mind in every other way. So there we go. All right. Any other questions?
Mike, when you talked about that, you use the word often, I choose. For example, when you hit the cares of life, when you go through the things that hit you where you could become resentful or angry or whatever, is it just a choice that you make, or do you give it to the Lord, just keep going back, giving it? Because I know there's things that hit you at times that are pretty big, and they could really, they're in your mind probably when you're going to sleep at night or whatever else. Okay. And you really don't have a lot of control over it too.
I mean, I do take control over a lot of things like that, in that it's my choice what I think about. So I've learned to be able to focus my thinking. So when I go to bed, I go to sleep. And I deliberately choose to put my whole body to sleep and my soul at rest, and my spirit is continually active. So I make that intentional choice. So there's lots of things which I used to think maybe I was subject to, but you've got to manage it correctly. You can't be in denial of any emotional things. Obviously, I've gone through last year a really difficult emotional situation in which I had to deal with the emotions of abandonment and, you know, that sort of thing. And I couldn't be in denial over it. So I had to manage it. Well, I do that with cast all your cares onto the Lord, because he cares for you. So I don't do it independently. I never do anything on my own, because he's with me and in me, and I'm in him, and I'm seated in heavenly places, and I'm face to face with him all the time in the light. So there's a constant awareness that I'm not on my own, and therefore I operate out of that relational perspective where he cares for me, he wants the best for me, he's going to bring good out of every situation that happens, and I trust him. So sometimes you don't understand what's going on, why people do what they do, or why things happen the way they happen. But that, if you really, really know the unconditional love of God, then it doesn't shake your trust in his loving kindness, because I know that's who he is. Other people may not be kind or loving, and they may treat you really badly. But when they do, you have to deal with the emotions. Don't deny them, don't suppress them, deal with them, acknowledge them. Acknowledge that I am feeling sad because someone has treated me badly, or someone has made decisions about what they do and choose to do in life, which has affected me in a negative way. How do I deal with that? Well, I have to take account of it. You know, so grief is an emotion that everyone has when they suffer loss. You shouldn't suppress grief, but you shouldn't carry the grief yourself to the extension where it is a burden, because Jesus, you know, carries our griefs and sorrows if we give them to him to carry. But that doesn't mean we don't have any, I give them all to him, I got no emotions. You go through the stages of grief, but not on your own. He's carrying the weight of those feelings and emotions during the time you're walking it out. So for me, when I was in a state of grief and I had to handle how I was feeling, and it was constantly a reminder of it every day. It wasn't just, well, this happened and then it's gone. You know, if you're losing someone or you've lost something, then you don't have it anymore. Therefore, something's changed, and you've got to manage how you feel about that. So when someone has done something, in my situation, someone did something which affected me in that way, I had to deal with what they'd done. So I chose intentionally to forgive them and release them from what they'd done. Now, was that the only time I chose to forgive them and release them? No, I chose to forgive them, release them every time they did something that compounded what they'd done. So every time that I was emotionally impacted by that, and there were numerous occasions during the year where I had to face a fresh manifestation of loss or potential loss and all of that, then I was able to choose to forgive, choose to release, and deal with the emotions. Not deal with them as in deny them, but actually recognize that emotions are normal things to show you that there is a situation which is painful. So I was hurt emotionally. I was in pain emotionally. So I didn't deny it, but I didn't allow it to control me either. And I allowed him to heal me by going through the grief process, walking it out with him, and daily talking to him about it. I'm feeling this, I'm feeling sad. And there were times when I was doing all sorts of stuff and it wasn't on my mind at all. But other times it was in my face and I had to deal with the reality of what I was feeling. And I went through the stages of denial a little bit. It was like, okay, I hope this isn't going to happen. How can I stop this? How can this change? What can I do to make this different? Is there anything I can do? So it's like, I'm not accepting this, without a fight, so I'm going to, challenge this in that way. Well, okay, that period, nothing changed. So, okay, I went through different period. Okay, how can I make sure this doesn't happen? Can I bargain my way out of this? Can I come up with a solution? Can I fix it? Tried to fix it. It wasn't, that didn't work. Okay. So now I'm frustrated that it didn't work. So I'm sort of angry because this isn't fair. Why has this happened to me? I didn't deserve this. That was my pity party for a little bit. And when I felt angry and frustrated, didn't last more than a few days. But it was a real emotion and I recognized it and I tried that it didn't get out of control. There were a couple of occasions where it got the better of me and I was, angry and expressed it. But I went through that and then got to the point, okay, Father, this is not changing. I couldn't change it. You aren't changing it because God can't force someone to do what you want them to do. And he won't even force them to do what he wants them to do. So I came to a point of acceptance. So, okay, I'm accepting this situation. It's not the situation I want, but I'm accepting it. Then at that point, my choice to forgive then meant I could bless the person and want the best for them, even if it wasn't what I wanted or what I thought was best. I had to get to that point. That meant I truly was at a point of forgiveness okay, I'm not going to be obstructive or get in the way or trying to make this awkward. I'm going to accept the situation. And other than God doing something miraculously to change it, I'm going to accept that this is what it is. And I realized that, he wasn't going to override someone's free will and choice. So I came to the point of acceptance. And then that's then when another stage of emotion kicked in, which was reality. I'm feeling really sad now because now almost like I've accepted this is going to happen and I'm sad over it. I don't want this to happen, but I'm sad. And I was for about a month. Both before, during, and after. I was really sad, felt really sad, didn't try and hide that, just felt it. But I knew he was with me. I knew that he was caring for me and loving me. But you can't, go through a grief process without there being sadness when it really hits you that this is the reality of the situation. So I was sad. And, that lasted for a while. And I was sad, but I knew he loved me and he was with me in it. So I wasn't on my own. I'd never felt overwhelmed by it, but I was sad. And that over a period, then that sadness sort of lessened to the point where now I'm not sad anymore. I need to move on. And okay, God, what's next? Whatever that is, I'm open for whatever you want. So for me, that was a long process because it went a whole year before this started, before it ended. And at the end, it was the saddest time because everything was a reminder that this was now actually going to end in that way. So for me, then that became something which I went through, came out the other side. Now I'm okay. I'm good. God was with me all the way through it. It never caused me either to feel shame or guilt or those type of things, which is what religion can put on you when you go through sort of a grief process sometimes. And now I'm in a place where, okay, I'm just looking forward to the future, but I live every day, a day at a time. And, I choose intentionally to have all that I need to manage that day. So if there was sadness in that day, then I would choose to have what I needed to manage the sadness. So it wasn't, nothing was ever done haphazardly. I was always able to have that relationship in where life was there in abundance to draw on. and to enable me to be able to function in my sonship in that way. So yeah, intentionality is so important when you choose to forgive, to release, to bless, and you choose to manage what goes around relational issues in a way that you keep your heart right as much as you possibly can. And there are occasions where those emotions sort of got a little bit overwhelming, and then I had to draw back on, you know, the life that I had and the relationship I had with the Father, and realize that, you know, I'm loved, and actually whatever the world offers you, it's like it's nowhere in comparison what the Father has for you. So, you know, I realized that what I have in the Father is a relationship which meets all my needs. Then anything other on top of that is a bonus. So I don't feel lacking in anything, even though there could be a bonus on top of what I already had, but it would only be that. It's like the icing on the cake or whatever. Great. But if no one ever loved me and everyone hated me, I would still feel loved and accepted by God, you know. And I realized that not everyone, you know, likes you, and not everyone agrees with you, and not everyone, you know, some people really don't like you at all. Well, that's okay. You know, that's their choice. It's not going to affect how I feel about myself, because that comes from my relationship with the Father. So I know I'm his son, and he loves me and cares for me and wants the best for me. So even in a very difficult situation, which we all face things in life, you know, then I know he's with me, and he cares for me, and he wants the best for me, and his grace is limitless. So I'm never going to run out of his power to be able to overcome and to be able to live the way he wants me to live. So, you know, but that's life, and you have to manage life.
Mike, when you were going through that process, did you find that God spoke to you, or did you find he was quiet and you just kind of worked on what you knew your relationship was with him to draw on? They're two different things, really.
Well, during that process, I didn't want to talk about that all the time. You know what I mean? I was listening to him mostly through that whole process, and I had journals of things that he was talking to me about. Sometimes I would share with him how I felt, and he would comfort me, and then we would carry on talking. So I didn't dwell on that was the major point of conversation that I had with the Father for all of that time, but I was real. So when I felt like I wanted to talk about it, like going boldly to the throne of grace at time of need. Well, when I felt I had a need to talk to him about it and share, I would, and he would talk to me, and he would encourage me, and he would bless me. And, you know, when there are decisions to be made, I asked him, what do you want me to do here? Do I have your permission to do this? Is this what you want? And I checked out each time there was something that may change the situation, that I only did what I checked out with him. And of course, you know, I wanted to only do things out of love, but that's not easy, you know. But when you receive his love, that love empowers you to love others. Now, loving them sometimes is letting them go. You know, you have to say, well, okay, if this person wants this, and this is what they want, and this is what they've chosen, I have to accept that this is what they want, and I have to choose to allow them to do that and bless them doing it. So, and that's, you know, you have to come to that. It doesn't miraculously appear that you can just do it. You have to go through the process of the emotion so you can get to that point of, that's where I now am. And in all the journey, he was with me. I never lost a night's sleep. Wow. Because I learned how to go to sleep. You know, I've always learned how to go to sleep. No matter, you know, I can't remember, you know, more than once in the last 30 years have I ever, you know, not gone to sleep within 10 minutes, you know. And sometimes that's because I'm thinking about stuff that I want to take into that realm. And other times, you know, I just need to process the day before I go to sleep. Most of the time I'm asleep before I even have any time to think of anything, because I know how to do it. But, you know, in reality, when the conversations were had, I brought up most of the conversations, and occasionally he reminded me of things that he wanted me to be able to focus on, his goodness and his mercy and his kindness and all of those things, and the fact that he was going to bring something good out of a situation that, you know, I didn't want. You know, so I trust him. You know, I trust that he's good, and he's good to me all the time. And, you know, that's how I can testify to going through that situation, in his goodness and in his mercy and kindness and love, and, you know, not sort of falling apart or not being able to function. I was able to function all the way through it. You know, now sometimes, you know, I would have wanted to talk to someone about it, and there were only a few people that I had liberty to be able to talk about it initially. And then I started to talk about it in vague terms, that shared that, you know, I was going through processes that were difficult. And eventually, obviously, you know, when I felt able to, without breaking confidentiality and other things, then I was able to share that in a wider sense. You know, but God was there tangible, and his presence was there to comfort and to strengthen and to encourage all the way through. And I just made sure that I didn't do anything independently as much as possible, to try and keep that being only doing what I'm seeing the Father doing. You know, that isn't an idealistic thing. It's a reality thing when you have a relationship where you have intimacy, because you can share everything. You don't hide anything. You don't need to hide anything. And in that, you know, you get thoughts that you have to deal with. Take captive the thought. Well, what will people think? Well, okay, I'll take that captive. I don't really care, in one sense, because it's what God thinks that really matters. That puts other people's thinking into perspective. And, you know, to be honest, people have been very, very supportive and encouraging and helpful right throughout. You know, so from that sense, you know, those I was able to talk to were good friends, and they were very helpful and encouraging and gave me an opportunity of talking if I needed to. But when you talk to God all the time, you know, you don't need to process as much with other people. I did it as much to be accountable, to make sure people were aware and therefore would look out to make sure that anything that was happening, that I wasn't just deluding myself, you know what I mean? So, because they can sort of say, well, how are you doing and what's going on? And I wanted that, because I think that's a healthy, balanced way. But majority of the process was worked out with God. And, you know, I had a sounding board at home with my daughter. So we had a lot of conversations, and she was, you know, helpful in that she was always there to be a sounding board, and sometimes tell me that wasn't very helpful or that wasn't very kind, what you said. So, oh, okay, I need to address that then. I need to look at that. What was going on if you thought that I wasn't being very kind, or that, you know, because you have to get to that point where acceptance is the way you then think. It's not automatic, you know, and, you know, but God is good, you know, God is so good. And, you know, I can testify to his goodness and mercy and kindness and grace, you know, in difficult situations. It's all else saying God is good when, you know, you know, everything's great. When things aren't great, then that's when the test is, you know, was God good? Yes, he was. Did he enable me to come through this? Yes, he did. You know, do I feel any different about myself? No. You know, do I recognize that you contribute to everything in relationships? Yes. So am I perfect? No. Am I more self-aware as a result of this process? Yes, because that's part of the unraveling of understanding how you think and feel through a process. You become more self-aware in a good way, and therefore I'm more aware of how I respond in situations or circumstances, and how that historically outworked, because I wasn't as self-aware in the past, and therefore some of my behaviors, I didn't understand why I was as I was. And some of that can be because you're broken. Some of that can be because that's how you're wired. And I became more aware of how I'm wired by God. And I kept going back to him saying, well, does this need healing? Does this need transformation and change? And some things were yes, and some things were no. That's how you're made. That's what enables you to be able to do what you do, because you're wired to think that way. Well, when I was aware of that, that then helped me to relate to people who don't understand the way you think, and may just look at the way you think and the way then you act as, well, not the way they do. You know, like when you sort of understand redemptive gifts and you understand we're wired differently redemptively, that gives you grace for people, because you realize that they think differently from you, they function differently for you, and you need to honor them for the way they function and for who they are, because then you receive their blessing when you honor them for who they are. So, you know, initially I struggled with mercy gift people, you know, because I'm not wired that way. I want to fix things, not go there to people. You know what I mean? So I want to understand why, what can we learn? How do we fix this? How do we make sure, you know, well, some people just want an arm around them, you know, and they just want someone to listen to them, you know, when I'm trying to fix it. So understanding where someone else is coming from then gives you a help. Well, what does that person need at this moment? Rather than, you know, how can I fix this for them? Which, you know, which is not always possible. And, you know, when you can't fix things for yourself, then you've got to get to a point where you sort of are aware of how that works out in practice. So, you know, I am more self-aware, and I'm more aware of how sometimes I can be very focused to enable me to fulfill things that other people don't, because they're not as focused. Now, that sometimes can appear like you're single-minded and blinkered, and you only look at one thing at a time, and you focus on it, which I can do, but I'm now also aware of that tendency, which means I need to be aware of other people's reactions to me when I'm focused, and not to be so focused that I'm unaware of other people and what they're going through. You know, so I've learned a lot, you know, not just in the last year, but over the last 10 years, or particularly in terms of more understanding myself, understanding how I function and work on the inside, and learning how to be intentional about living out that identity in the right way. And whether a weakness is, ensuring I understand them, because not all weaknesses are supposed to be strengthened. You know, because you're not supposed to be like somebody else, and that's a weakness in an area, you could say, which really you don't want to focus on trying to strengthen that area to the detriment of actually your strength, which is the things that you are wired for and are made for. So I learned to accept, you know, accept the things that God doesn't want me to change, you know, but to also change the things that he does, and to allow him to transfigure and change me and transform my thinking and understanding and everything else along that process. So being aware, you know, because, you know, there are certain scenarios that I'd struggle in because of the way I'm wired, and some social settings it becomes emotional overload sometimes when the purpose of that setting becomes shallow, and I just don't like it. Now I can sit with people who are hungry to talk about things that I'm interested in and talk about God and the kingdom for hours and hours, and I'll never ever get in any way worn out doing that, and I will have strength. But there are times when I've sat in social settings where it's just like, get me out of here, I just don't want to be here anymore, and because the conversation has descended into banality and shallowness, and I just can't cope with it. But that's part of how I'm wired, and I was with God, and I was say, okay, do I fix this? How can this be changed? And I really felt God say, no, this is part of who you are. This has wider things you don't fully understand, but don't try and change something it's the way I made you. So, that gives you more of a thing, but also now you understand what you're feeling in those social situations. Now you can manage your withdrawal from those situations better. And some of those family situations that I used to get in, be just like, I just need to get out of here. So I would find a way of getting out of here, usually, just by leaving the room and going somewhere else for a while, and people and the rest of they just thought I was rude, but they didn't know what was going on the inside, and so when I understood myself and we talked about it, then they became aware and they understood. And then they know, so they're also aware that now I say, okay, I've had enough, now I'm off, and in a nice way. And they're understanding, and therefore that's great. So that therefore you learn more about life and how to manage it than I did years ago, and because I didn't understand myself, and I didn't understand what was going on emotionally on the inside when certain things triggered me. Now I understand the triggers, now I can manage the triggers, but actually I also realized that I don't have to sit and be miserable in a situation. I can say, it's okay, I've had enough, now I'm going to do something else, without actually doing it in a wrong way or trying to make them change. I just don't need to be in the environment, for as much as I've become more tolerant, so I can cope in the environment longer. But there comes a point where I've had enough now, but I understand that, and they understand it, and therefore there's understanding, and therefore that helps quite a lot in this whole way when you become more aware of who you are and how you're wired. But make sure you don't use that as an excuse to treat people badly, because even though things happen, you still got to love people, and you still got to demonstrate how to do something in the best way. Now I'm learning, and I'm still on a journey and learning, about myself, and learning about how all these things work and how to relate to people in a way, but I am wired a particular way, and I'm sort of more introverted than extroverted, in a sense, and I'm quite shy. People think, oh, because I talk to people all day and do this sort of stuff, that I'm sort of extrovert and outgoing, but I'm not really. I'm quite happy with my own company at times, and happy in my workshop and in the garden or whatever, and and I'm I could sit on a train and not talk to anybody, or a plane, or I'm not the sort of person who's going to sit next to someone on a plane and strike up a conversation and speak for 10 hours on a flight. I'll probably just put the headphones on and watch a movie, because that's more how I am. But I'm aware of that, and if God wanted me to speak to someone, he knows that he can open that for me to do that, and I will respond. So I had some very good conversations with people I don't know in situations where I knew that was what God was engineering. But I feel no guilt, or condemnation that I can sit and watch 5 movies on a flight to the US and just not talk to anybody. I'll be civil, but you know, I don't feel obliged to be what anyone else wants me to be. I just want to be the best that God has made me to be. Now, there's lots of work to do on that, but that's the, you know, that's the journey that we're on. We are on a journey to maturity. You know, we're not yet fully mature. Yeah, we started out as babies and we're becoming fully mature sons, and eventually we will become fathers ourselves in, you know, whatever that looks like in the future. Yeah, but life throws you some curveballs sometimes, and you've got to be able to be aware and manage that in a way. Yeah. But you know what I feel in it all, God is good. God is good. I know I'm unconditionally loved. Therefore, you know, when things happen which are not the ideal and not what you want, that doesn't shake your trust in God's and his love, and he's there. You know, that's what I've found, experienced, and you know, that's for me what I can testify coming through you know, a very difficult year, that God is good, you know, and whatever's happened, in spite of me not wanting it, and I don't think God wanted it, the reality is God will still bring good out of it, and I trust him to do that. But I'm not going to try and engineer the good. That's his job, to bring good out of it. I just need to recognize the good, and sometimes the good is not something that you immediately recognize as a consequence of something. So we need to be sensitive to, oh yeah, you look back and think, yeah, if that hadn't happened, this wouldn't happened. And actually God did bring some really good things, and that brought some things that I would have never imagined or thought, you know. But you look back and you see the things in hindsight that God was working through in life. And I've seen that in, you know, numerous occasions in life that you couldn't see at the time. Yeah. But the more, I guess, you become sensitive to who God is and how God functions in your life, then it's easier then to be aware of what God is doing and to cooperate with it and with him, and not sort of resist, you know, in that way.
Mike, when you say God always actively is engaged in bringing about good in our lives,
Yeah.
and he will never violate our free will. So does this mean this process takes place when we give him permission? He's God, of course, he can do anything, but
no, he won't force good on you, but he's at work to bring good out of a situation that you might not know how to bring good out of a situation yourself. So you trust that what he's doing is going to be for your best. And I do give him permission. The reality is, he's got permission to do whatever he wants. You know, I'm not going to oppose him in any way, because I've surrendered in a sense. You know, why would I want to do something independently of him? So I want free will that's going to be independently of him. Do I choose to operate in relationship with him? Yes, I do, every day. Now, the good that he can bring is outworked with our cooperation. So let's say he desired to bring something good that you opposed and didn't cooperate with. Well, he wouldn't benefit from that good. So he would look to bring something else good out of it, because he continually wants to bring good out of it. And, you know, you got to understand he's also operating outside of time and space as well. So it's all now. So things can be rewritten on the fly, let's say, you know, to take into account our cooperation or lack of, so that good still comes out of it. It's like, you know, I'm walking here, but I go off over there. He's going to give me every opportunity to come back onto the same path. But depending on which opportunity I take will determine when I come back onto the same path. It could be in 5 minutes. It could be in 5 years. If I keep rejecting the choices that he's opportunities for coming back on the same path. But he's never going to stop giving me opportunities to come back on the path. You know, so, but he's able then to incorporate that still within the framework of everything, you know, which is, you know, not humanly possible. for anyone, because he's working with billions of people all the time. So, and looking to bring good of every one of their lives and looking to help them find and fulfill their identity and destiny. So it's like, I'm just glad that I don't have to do that. I got enough just with myself, let alone thinking about everybody else that exists and being at work in their lives as their dad. Yeah.
Mike, does good mean better?
Well, better from
Where you what the situation. In other words, if God outworks good, and maybe I'm looking at oftentimes, oh well, you're going through this, but when it's over, it's even going to be better than it ever was before.
Well, that's you might not think that when you're going through something, but when you get through something, and then he then brings, I guess, the example in the Bible will be Job, who lost everything he feared losing, but then God gave him twice as much, and in the end. So in a sense, better is, I guess, a relative term to what you looked at. So for me, going forward, if something was better, it might be different. So different is, what are you comparing to? And I've got to look at, I take all of that into account, but I just trust him that he's got my best interest at heart and he wants the best for me, and sometimes that might not be what I think is best.
Okay. How about this? You're ahead.
I'm
where you were at that situation. So there, now you're here.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I'm not looking back at where I was. I'm looking forward to where I'm going to be, but I'm only living one day at a time. I tend to live one day at a time because that's all I need to generate today. I only need to be out working who I am and what my destiny is today. I don't need to be that concerned about tomorrow or the next day. There are some things like, I've got something I'm doing on Sunday, so I need to be prepared for Sunday, but I'm not living today focused on Sunday. I'm living today from today's perspective, which some of it may relate to Sunday, but I'm not concerned about Sunday, because when I get to Sunday, I will have everything I need for what I'm doing that day. And I look at it in those terms, that today is whatever God's got for me today. I'm looking to be in tune with him and only do what I'm seeing him doing today, which is not just spiritual things. He wants me to enjoy today. He wants me to have fun today. He wants me to enjoy creation today. He wants me to experience life in abundance today, which a lot of that has very little to do with what we would think of, spiritual things. But then when you are able to function in a multi-dimensional perspective, in a non-linear way, then your spirit can be functioning, doing all those stuff, and you can still enjoy everything you're doing here with a greater capacity to do that, because I'm not caught up in all the religious stuff I used to have to think I used to do, or all the duties and obligations I thought I had. Now I don't have any of those. I can enjoy life so much more because it's increased my capacity, because I'm not doing a whole lot of stuff that I thought I should be doing. Now there are no shoulds,
Mike, was there any time where you thought maybe you were hearing from God, or, where it's like, because sometimes, we wonder, well, is this God, or is this,
Well,
and sometimes you feel you're not even hearing from God sometimes. Or are you?
No, I don't ever get to that. Well, back in 2012, when I went through 4 months where I couldn't hear from him, that was for a very particular purpose, to bring me to a different stage in life, which brought me to a point of trust that I didn't have then. Now I do. I trust him. And therefore, I trust that our conversations, all the things he says, he knows better than I do what I need when I need it. And I trust that he's at work in my life for good. Therefore, do I understand everything all the time? No. Do I need to understand everything? No, because I trust him. When you need to understand everything, it wears you out because you've got to try and figure out whatever's going on. I trust him. He's my dad. He loves me. He's got the best for me. Therefore, I trust him in the outworking of that. So I get out of the way more when I used to try and, well, what do I need to do? How do I need to figure this out? What am I supposed to do in this situation? I'm at rest in that trust, which I don't question. Why is God not telling me? Well, because he don't want me to know. If God doesn't tell me something, I'm not assuming that that's a bad thing. I just trust that he'll tell me what I need to know when I need to know it. And if he wants to show something to me, if I talk to him, he never doesn't respond, but he responds in the way that he knows is best, which is maybe not the way I would have responded in the situation or what I think I need. But he knows what I need, which is better than what I know, which is why he keeps us safe from the things we think we need quite often by not giving them to us. Because I've asked him for lots of things that I'm glad he didn't give me. Now I look back, but I think trust is so important when it comes to God, that he is God. And therefore, inherently, he knows way, way more than I do and understands way more than I understand. And I have to trust that sometimes I don't need to understand. Now, that would have been so hard for me 10 years ago because I wanted to understand everything. And I needed to understand everything because that's where my identity came from. But now my identity comes out of my relationship with him. That's all that's important to me, the relationship. And that relationship may have a massive conversation about stuff which is amazing, or it may have, we're just hanging out and we don't talk at all. But I'm very sensitive to his presence. And I'm in the light of his presence, and that light is at work in me and on me all the time. But doesn't mean I need to understand it, which is, it's a point where for me, is the place where rest and trust come together. Because, I ask, why is this happening? And it's like, what he told me wasn't always what I wanted to hear, and sometimes he didn't tell me anything that I thought he should have told me, but he talked to me about stuff that actually is what I did need to hear. So ultimately, he's God and I'm not. And therefore, I do trust that he knows best. And when it doesn't line up with me, then my thinking is the thing that needs to change, which is what renewing of our mind's all about. Not being conformed to a pattern, whatever pattern that of the world that is put on me or placed in me. I need to differentiate between my being a product of the world and my upbringing to being who he has made me to be. And therefore, there's got to be a transfiguration, metamorphosis from who I am from a worldly perspective and all I've learned from that source to now my relationship with God in revealing the vast sum of his thoughts to me, which renews me to see the truth and transforms me so that I'm not the person that I am from a worldly perspective anymore. I'm not conformed to that mold as much as I was. And therefore he is continually transforming me to fit the mold of who I am from his perspective, which is an ongoing process. It's not an overnight thing or a weekend makeover. It is a journey, a life's journey that we're on. And it is, that journey for me is a joyous journey, even though there are some times of sadness, because joy and sadness are not mutually exclusive. Happiness and sadness are generally, because they come from the circumstances that you're in. But joy comes from a deeper relationship that I have with my Father, if you like, that fills me with joy because I trust in his goodness, and therefore that transcends the sadness of any situation that I might be going through, and enables me to go through it in a place of peace and rest in the midst of a storm, which may be a worldly storm, but in the sort of annals of eternity, if you like, 1 year out of an infinite time doesn't amount to much. Although God was with me and immanent every moment of that year. So he's transcendent and immanent. And if we begin to also learn to be aware of his transcendence and immanence, then we can begin to live from a different way of perspective of life. You know, and I do see if I'm living in an immortal state, then there are going to be quite a few storms that you have to face from a world perspective, but from a kingdom perspective and an eternal perspective, they're a dot. You know, they're a dot on an unending line. And if I see that perspective, then that helps me realize that this, is it somewhere say, when one day dawns, there's a new opportunity. Yesterday may have been difficult, but today is an opportunity and a fresh start. New mercies every morning. And I live from that perspective. So I'm not going to run out of resources for today by thinking of too much of tomorrow or yesterday. I need to live today and live in the moment of today. So being mindful of the joy that's present in my relationship, the peace that's present in my relationship, the love that's present in my relationship with them. Hi everyone, we're starting a Patreon page, patreon.com/freedomarc. And we would like to invite you to partner with us in taking the message of God's unconditional love, limitless grace, triumphant mercy to a bigger global audience.